Okay, I'm back. I'm gonna try and record one more chapter before I have to get to
Yeah,
before I have to take a break to take my pills.
yeah,
I actually took about an hour's long break.
yeah.
I actually ended up taking about an hour break, so for once I didn't yawn when the camera first came on, so let's see if we can keep that going. Chapter 96, Confessions. For the sixth day this week, Amber lay in the bed alone, staring at the clock. It was just after midnight now, and she sighed, pushing herself up. This was not something she would let go or let slide. This was the second night now she'd woken and found Finn gone, the space beside her in bed cold. Ember stood walking from the room. Maybe he was in the bathroom? Door open, room empty. Living room? Ember flicked on the light, watching as Wolfie, who'd been under his blanket on the couch, popped his head up, now looking like a polka-dotted ghost. She could hear the sound of his wagging tail slapping against the couch, and it made her smile. "Go back to sleep, love," she said, flicking the light off. Turning, Emma walked down the hall to the kitchen. Pulling out a bucket, rag, and some cleaner, she set them on the table, deciding to first finish the dishes in the sink. The time steadily passed as she cleaned the apartment. The bathroom was now spotless, the kitchen immaculate, and the living room neat and tidy. Grabbing the empty laundry basket from the bathroom, Emma walked back to the bedroom, picking up stray clothes as she went. She had half a mind to leave all Finn's dirty laundry right there on the floor, but she didn't. Walking to the laundry room, she emptied the basket into the washer and frowned. There was plenty of room left in the machine. Deciding to wash the bedding, Emma walked from the room, stripping everything from the bed. Sheets, pillowcases, blanket, all of it, shoving them into the washer and turning it on. Her landlord would be getting a stellar review for the industrial washer and dryer regardless, because this beat the laundromat by far. Back in the bedroom, Ember was replacing the bed sheets. As she tucked the edge of the sheet under the mattress, she felt as her fingers jammed against what felt like a bundle of papers. That was weird, especially because she'd had Finn help her flip the mattress last week, and nothing had been there then. Lifting the edge of the mattress, Ember found a thick manila folder she'd never seen before. Pulling it from under the mattress, she placed it on top of the dresser and continued on with making the bed. While Ember was curious about where the file had come from, she figured Finn would have his reasons for putting it there. She'd given him the third degree by the time she'd found him snooping through her diary. Ember had told him then that it was a massive violation of her trust. She didn't want to violate his trust by going through whatever was in there. Grabbing the folder to slide it back under the mattress, the sudden sound of a thump and a yelp snapped her attention, and quickly Ember made her way to the living room. The sight of the sight that met her made her both sigh in relief and laugh. Wolfie had gotten stuck in the blanket, a fear for which he was well known at this point, and fallen off the couch in a tangle of fabric and weird lanky teenage dog limbs. Laying the file on the table, Ember proceeded to untangle Wolfie, watching as his head popped free, lunging forward to lick her face. "You fresh boy," she said, smirking, finally unraveling Wolfie as he now bounded around the room. He returned with his tug rope, nudging it into her hands, and with a smile, Ember obliged him. After what felt like at least several dozen throws, Ember looked at the clock. It was almost 1:30 in the morning, and with a sigh she dropped his toy into the basket near the door. Lifting the file, Ember turned to leave, feeling as it was snatched from her hand. Wolfie was on the other end as the documents spilled everywhere. "Wolfie, no!" She grabbed his collar, pulling the folder from his mouth. "Bad boy! Go to your room! Out!" she snapped, pointing down the hall, watching as he hurried away and into the laundry room, where his crate and nest of blankets were. Lifting a piece, Ember took a double take, spotting a photograph beneath it. Immediately, she reached for the photo, feeling a lump in her throat. Why was Finn hiding a picture of her papa? The photo, it was him, but it was different. He looked almost a decade older, but that was impossible. Now she looked to the paper in her hand, actually looking at it. These were arrest records for her papa. Ember's heart began to race. This is wrong. This has to be wrong. Quickly she began skimming through the documents, placing them on the table as she went. Everything she was reading, it had to be wrong. Ember was close to tears now. Her papa would never do these things. He never, ever would do these things. Finally she paused, leaving the last document face down on the floor. In her hand was a handwritten sheet of paper in achingly familiar handwriting. Ember skimmed through the page, her eyes streaming now, feeling more than sick. This was his handwriting. She remembered this day. She and Finn were just talking about this, and Finn was the one who brought it up. What was going on, and why did he have all of this? These questions only served to make her heart ache. Reaching down, she grabbed the last piece of paper. Flipping it over, Amber felt as if all the air vanished from her lungs. It was a death certificate dated 2 years ago. The wave of grief she'd felt had been instantaneous and immense. The moment her eyes landed on the checked box near the bottom of the page, though, she broke. Deceased inmate T-34796A, body condition cremated, X, buried. Deceased prisoner's body location claimed by family, next of kin, unclaimed, X. Sitting there, Amber felt as if she'd completely collapsed into herself. She cried beyond devastated and utterly heartbroken. Her parents left him there. Her papa, the man who shaped who she was, the man who'd given her every ounce of confidence and self-worth she had. They left him there. The one man she would forever compare every single man on earth to. He did this terrible thing for her safety, and they left him there. As the sobs racked her body and squeezing her arms tightly, Ember forced herself to take a gasping breath. Looking up, she spotted Finn standing there in shock. Standing, she stumbled as she rushed over to him. "Finn, what is all this? Why do you have all this? Why does it say my papa killed someone?" she asked desperately, her eyes searching his, pleading for an answer. "He would never do that. Finn, my papa wouldn't do that. He... Now Finn wrapped his arms around her, and pulling Ember close, she sobbed against his chest, taking solace wherever she could. "They left him there! No!" Shaking her head, Ember pressed her palms against Finn's chest, forcefully pushing him away with trembling hands. "Don't touch me! What is going on?" she asked, stepping back away from Finn. I swear it... It was then Finn realized he didn't know what to say to her. How could he explain to her that he dug up her family's history to figure out a better way to propose to her, only to find out all of this? The longer he stood there in silence, searching desperately for the right words to say to her, the faster her tears fell, and the greater the look of utter devastation grew on Ember's face. He opened his mouth to speak, feeling his own eyes burn as she shook her head, now backing away from him. "Ember, no!" Now she covered her ears, still shaking her head, still crying, still backing away. Bumping into the doorway of their bedroom, she slipped inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. Finn bit back tears listening to her wailing scream, followed by heartbroken sobs that came from the other side of the door. This was bad. This was beyond bad. Pulling out his phone, he dialed Marceline. It was close to 2 a.m. on a Monday night. If he was lucky or anything close to it, he'd be able to catch her just before she went to bed. Even so, this late was pushing it, even for him. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, Finn, it's late for you to be calling. Everything okay?" Hearing his friend's voice, Finn felt a brief sense of relief. But the continued sounds of Ember's meltdown brought him back to reality. "Everything's not okay, Marcy. I messed up huge, and Em's not okay. He's gonna kill me, but I wanted to know if Ig was around." "We just got back from Daddy's an hour or so ago, and he said he needed to take a drive. Something about twin telepathy," Marceline said. Not even a moment later did Finn hear knocking on their apartment door. Walking to the door, Finn opened it and was face to face with Ignitus. The moment he heard his sister crying, Finn was pinned with the sharpest look he'd ever received from the man before him. "Marcy, before I let you go, can you please tell your husband not to kill me? Please?" Finn asked in a small voice, offering Ig the phone, who lifted it to his ear. "Marceline, baby, I love you more than words will ever describe," he said, listening to her soft reply. "I trust you. I love you. I'll see you tomorrow." Ending the call, he looked up at Finn. "Talk." And he did. Finn talked so much that Ignitus's head was spinning. Finn spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything to him. All of it. He left nothing out. Everything up to and including tonight. Even how he'd stalked their father in hopes he'd be able to invite their parents to whatever proposal thing they had without issue. And finally, how when he'd come home, she'd been upset having found the file. The look Ignitus wore at the end of the discussion was not one Finn was expecting to see. Finn expected to be beaten to death, or at least pretty close. The face before him, though, was one filled with regret and sadness.
Yeah.
"This is my fault. I should have told her the truth years ago when it happened," Ig said softly. "What do you mean?" Finn asked, thinking of Aiden's comment from earlier this night about the counselor and the baseball bat. I knew he went to jail. When we were kids, they said he died a few months after he was sentenced. Our parents. Of course they lied. He looked towards the bedroom, now standing. Finn watched as he walked down the hall, tapping on the door. Emma, please open the door. Finn listened as the door opened, watching as Ignitus entered the room, the door closing with a slam. The moment he entered the room, Ember threw herself at him, and he stumbled, feeling as they collided into the door, slamming it shut and knocking his breath away. Her head was buried into his neck, and Ignitus could feel the heat of her tears soaking through his shirt. Wrapping his arms around his little sister, Ignitus lifted her, walking her over to the bed, sitting her down on it. This he knew was going to be a very long night, and Ember he knew was probably not going to be very receptive in her current condition. Hey, he said softly, crouched down, now trying to get her to look at him. When Ember did, he was met with the saddest look he was sure she'd ever given him. He gave her a sad smile. We're gonna have a squish night, okay? He asked softly, watching as Ember nodded. I'll be right back. I'm gonna leave the door unlocked so I can come back in. Oh, I'll be right back. I'm gonna leave the door unlocked so I can come back in. Once again, she nodded. Grabbing a pillow from the bed and the blanket on the edge of the bed, he walked from the room. Entering the living room, he tossed them both at Finn, watching as the blonde blinked in surprise. Before he could even speak, Ignitus left the room, making his way to the bathroom, then the kitchen, before re-entering the bedroom, closing the door behind him. Taking the warm, wet cloth he brought from the bathroom, Ignitus began washing Ember's face, watching the pale salt lines from her tears slowly vanish as he wiped her cheeks. He handed her a bottle of water and pulled the Tylenol from his pocket. Here, he said, watching as she took the pills, along with a sip of water. He watched, waiting as she took another much longer sip before he was satisfied. All right, Em, squish persish. What? FP said as he kicked off his shoes, flopping on the bed in Finn's spot. Ember lay back, her head resting on her brother's chest, feeling as he smoothed her hair. Arm? He offered, feeling as she nodded her head. Lifting his arm, he felt as Ember hugged it, scooting over and adjusting so his arm was draped across her chest, his hand resting on her shoulder in a one-armed hug. He felt as he squeezed his arm, and did the same, squeezing her against him. Squish, he said softly, feeling as she squeezed his arm again, him doing the same in return. Ignitus, for his part, wasn't sure where to start. He wanted to tell Ember everything, to explain what happened. More than anything, he wanted to apologize for keeping it a secret for so long. At this point, he wasn't sure how, or even if bringing it up was a good idea or not. Ember, however, was the one who broke the silence. I don't know how Finn and I are going to get past this, she said softly, Ignitus feeling shocked. Emma, I talked to Finn. I can tell you everything. He genuinely wasn't trying to hurt you, he said, watching as Ember looked confused. Since when do you stick up for my boyfriends? When they're willing to risk life and limb and be shot at just to get a blessing from my shitty dad, he said, watching as her head tilted up to look at him. He wasn't kidding when he asked if I'd ever want to marry him? She asked, watching as her brother shook his head. Nope, I had to go get him from their place the other day, he said, making it a solid point to avoid mentioning the altercation he'd had with their father. I've never seen a man more determined to make you happy than Finn. He may not always go about things the right way, but he has the best intentions, he said gently. Ember, however, sighed, closing her eyes. The highway to hell is paved with good intentions, Iggy. I know. Speaking of that, there's something I need to talk to you about, Emma. She squeezed his arm again. Ig, I don't know if I can handle anything right now, she said with a sniffle, still feeling his fingers gently rubbing her head. I know how you feel, he said, now looking towards the window. He could see the sky lightening up and could hear the birds outside. The memory of that night in the hospital, after the fire, was something that had never left him. He could hear Ember's shuddering breath, and felt as she squeezed his arm again, he doing the same for her. Squish, he said softly. I know, and I'm sorry. Now she dissolved into tears as she continued, now squeezing his arm in an absolute death grip. Iggy, I'm so sorry. It was my fault. I lit the candle for Nana before I left. It's my fault Nana died. Please don't hate me. Ember prepared herself for the explosion she felt would come. She expected to be pushed away from him, to be screamed at. She wouldn't blame him. She deserved every second of his pain towards her. She took away the person he loved best in this world. She took away the two people on this planet they loved the most. Ignitus had known this for years now, yet the words coming from her mouth still hurt as she spoke them, taking responsibility. I know, you lit the candle. What happened, though, wasn't your fault, Emma. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. They're both gone because of me. The utter devastation in her voice killed him. Knowing he couldn't hide it anymore, Ignitus readied himself. He had to tell her. Now Ignitus took a breath, closing his eyes as he spoke. No, what happened with Papa was my fault. Entirely my fault, Ignitus said, firmly watching as Ember shook her head, trying desperately to slow her tears. But he said on the paper. He lied. He lied to cover for me, Ignitus said, feeling the familiar pang of guilt. Iggy, I don't understand. It was that day Papa and I saw you come out of that room. 7 years ago. The summer sun was beaming as the sounds of laughing children could be heard. Kids were everywhere around the camp, and laughter and screaming was the norm as they went about their activities. Ignitus walked down the dirt path towards the lake, hiding his hands in his pockets, looking pissed as he stormed away from the mess hall. He didn't want to be in this annoying place and with these annoying people. Their birthday had passed last week, and now in the early August sun, Ignitus stewed in his thoughts. 15 sucked. The only reason he still came to camp is because Ember asked him to come, because she had a stupid crush on the new camp counselor, so says everybody, and yet here he was, getting into fights, while she was off doing who the hell knew what. That to him wasn't fair. Ignitus wanted to spend his summers with his friends hanging out, causing mischief, and getting into the fun kind of trouble. Trouble, though, always seemed to find him. His hand throbbed in his pocket, and looking around to see that he was alone, Ignitus examined it. It was still bleeding from the deep scratches on his knuckles, and Egg made a mental note that punching a mouthful of braces was a shitty idea. In his defense, from the corner of his eye, the girl from behind looked enough like Ember, with her short red hair, for it to be a genuine mix-up. Knowing it wasn't her still didn't stop him from punching the kid, who kept snapping the girl's bra strap, making her yelp in shock despite her requests for him to stop. He spotted a sand pail and a small sand castle as he continued on, making his way along the edge of the lake. A sound from behind caught his attention, and turning he was rushed by 3 older campers. 2 grabbed him and the third hit him hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of him. He dropped like a brick, hitting the ground hard and struggling against the 2 who pinned him in place as the third continued hitting him. Did you really think I was just going to let you sucker punch my little brother without any consequences? He snarled, continuing his onslaught, Ignitus still struggling beneath him, trying in vain to get the other 2 off him. Finally, he managed to get his leg free, kicking the older boy away as he continued trying to get up off the ground. 3-on-1 was not good odds. He'd almost succeeded when the splash of water against his face startled him. Their grips on him tightened and their weight on him increased, and Ignitus watched in complete horror. The boy he'd kicked began smoking and poured the pail, now full of lake water, over his face. Immediately he was choking and desperate for air. Thrashing beneath the 2 boys, he was in a complete panic, listening as they laughed. He had a reprieve, coughing and gasping for air, only long enough for them to refill the bucket. This continued on twice more, and Ignitus felt close to blacking out. Suddenly the water stopped midstream as the pail hit the ground, and the pressure on his body vanished as the 3 boys scattered. Ignitus lay on the ground in a daze, taking short, choppy breaths. He felt like he was still drowning. Coughing, he gagged, throwing up lake water. He felt as he was rolled over, someone thumping him on the back, and he felt as the shift in position helped get the water from his lungs as he continued coughing. All right, kid, let's get you to medical. Now Ignitus pushed himself up on trembling arms, continuing to cough and choke. Looking up, he could see the 3 boys along with 2 more now, watching him. Ignitus was no fool. They were waiting for him to push the man away and storm off. They were in no way done with him. Screw that. Send me home, he said, his eyes never leaving the group up the hill. Kid, you should really see the nurse. Make me. I started the fight in the mess hall. I was the one who hit Braceface. I cut my hand when I hit him, he said, still not looking away as the counselor looked him up and down. All right, let's go, kid. I'm calling your parents at the nurse's office. Ignitus felt as his arm was grabbed, the man pulling him to his feet. Looking over, he felt complete loathing. It was Ember's boyfriend. Passing the group on the way up, Ignitus wanted nothing more than to tackle the smirking prick. 5-on-1, though, was worse odds than 3-on-1, and he'd just gotten his ass kicked. He choked, coughing again, now listening to their snickering laughs. In a flash of pure rage, he turned, launching himself at the group. None of them thought he'd actually try it, and that had been very much to his advantage. In the time it had taken them to realize something was wrong, Ignitus had tackled the 3 closest boys, catching the one he'd wanted in the trio. While the 2 on the ground scrambled away, Ignitus began punching the one beneath him as hard and as fast as he could. This was his best chance, because he knew the counselor would call for help, and then pull him off of them. What followed was exactly what Ignitus predicted, and when he was pulled from the older boy, he allowed it, immediately releasing him. He let the counselor hold him back, as he was quickly pulled away towards the office. "What the hell, kid?" the man asked as he dragged Ignitus along, and even though it was a rhetorical question, Ignitus responded back with one of his own. "How old are you to be calling me kid?" 25. So you dumb kid listen to the adult and get a damn move on, he snapped, pushing him farther up the hill towards the office. "So you mean to tell me my grandson was physically assaulted by multiple campers under your care, yet he's the only one to be sent home? None of the multiple boys who waterboarded my grandson will receive a punishment?" Ignitus stared right into the eyes of the cabin leader, who glowered at them. "Your grandson admitted to assaulting another camper. What was that boy doing? Sexually harassing a female camper? Where is his punishment?" The cabin leader looked to be at his wits' end, and the moment Ignitus's eyes met his, he smiled a wicked grin. Immediately the man's whole demeanor changed as he huffed, looking away from the teen. "Regardless, your grandson has had far too many chances through the years. He's no longer allowed as a registered camper on this property, now or in the future. Please remove him, as banned campers are not allowed on the grounds. Thank you, Mr. Flint. We'll see you this afternoon to pick up Ember," he said, standing and opening the door. Ignitus took his sweet time getting up, but after a sharp look from Papa, he hauled ass. Together they walked towards the parking lot, Ignitus taking in the view for the last time. It was a pretty place, but it was the people that sucked. He could see the row of storage sheds ahead of them, and wondered if he'd be able to convince Marshall to one day, in the dead of night, come back with him and steal their floats to use at the waterfall. It'd be a real-life lazy man's river. The thought made him grin, but the sigh from his papa caught his attention. Turning, he watched as Papa opened his mouth to speak, when the door of the shed ahead of them slammed open, catching both their attention. Ignitus watched the man walking by and recognized him, feeling the same loathing. Of course this guy would find a way to annoy him again, before he could escape their aggravation for the last time. The door swung shut with a click, and Papa shook his head. "This is the shit you deal with?" Papa asked, watching as Ignitus gestured wildly, back towards the camp as a whole, as though the answer should have been more than obvious. Immediately his grandfather raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Okay, okay." He shook his head, continuing on, Ignitus following in step. The door now in front of them opened once again, and Ignitus stared in shock as Ember walked out, looking dazed. "Emma?" He watched her glance up, and immediately she paled, looking like a deer in headlights. He watched as Papa grabbed her arm, bringing her along with them. "We're going home. We're going home." The ride home was quiet, and Ignitus sat in his bedroom after Papa brought them in. He said he wanted to talk to Ember, and it felt like it had been forever since then. Walking around the small cluttered room, Ig sighed, opening the door a crack and peeking out. He couldn't hear anyone, and he didn't see anyone. Opening the door wider, he slipped out, creeping down the hall towards Ember's room. Her door was open, and looking in, he didn't see Papa, so he slipped inside. "Where's the jailer?" he asked with a smirk, hoping for a laugh. However, Ignitus didn't get one. His sister hadn't so much as acknowledged him. "Are you okay, Emma?" He watched as she nodded her head. Now he gave her a skeptical look. "You're a really sucky liar." Looking up now, Ember glowered at him. "Papa went back to camp to yell some more." "Emma, what was that back there? You still look weird and spacey," he said, now looking her over as she steadily ignored him, seeming to prefer the view out of the window. This wasn't like her in the slightest, and he didn't like it. "Hey, Squish?" Reaching out, he touched her shoulder, watching as she flinched, quickly pulling away from his touch, not looking at him. Her reaction both hurt and infuriated him, and Ignitus knew immediately whose fault it was. He had been in such a rage that it seemed almost instantaneous that he was back on the campgrounds. It was late afternoon now, and the man in the staff parking lot seemed startled to see him. Ignitus stormed up face to face with him now, staring him down. "Stay the hell away from my little sister," he growled as the man now laughed. "Kid, do you not realize how many of you guys go here? I wouldn't be able to pick out your sister from the gaggle of young women crushing on me," he said, turning back to his car, loading up some of the sports equipment. "You know exactly who Ember is," Ignitus said acidly, watching as he stiffened at the mention of his sister's name. He turned, now facing the teen behind him once again. His voice now held no trace of humor. "I've got no idea who that is." "Yeah, you do. We watched you both come out of the storage shed today," he said, watching as the color drained from his face. "It's weird, a 25-year-old adult wanting to hang out like that with a girl who just turned 15. Rumor around the camp is that you're her boyfriend, which is funny when I think about it with how much you call me kid." Almost immediately, Ignitus was slammed on the ground, his head hitting the pavement with a hard smack. His head throbbed violently as the world spun around him. "See, your problem is that you think you're a badass when you're just a stupid fucking kid who needs to be put in his place." Again, Ignitus felt the world spin as the man's jarring blows struck him again and again and again. Suddenly, his head jerked to the side, his body felt numb, and everything went dark. The last thing he heard was a sickening metallic thwack, and the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. When he came to, Ignitus could hear his papa speaking to someone. Opening his eyes, he almost immediately regretted it, feeling as his head throbbed. He bit back a groan of pain, feeling wave after wave of nausea. He opened his eyes enough to get a glimpse of his surroundings. He was laying down in the front seat of the car and felt like he'd been hit by at least a train and two semis. Reaching back, he gently touched his head, feeling as the action himself making him gasp in pain. His fingers felt something cottony and soft. He'd expected to feel his hair, not the bandage that was wrapped around his head.
Uh,
Ignitus heard the car door open and felt as the engine started. "Son, you've got one a hell of an impulsive streak that's going to get you into more trouble than this if you're not careful," he said as they started off down the street. "I've got no problem with you going after anybody who hurts your sister or the people important to you, but you have to be smart about it, Ignitus. Your youth and your bravado will only take you so far. I think today you may have learned that lesson. You have to be smart too, son, and this was not smart." "My head hurts," he said in a weak voice. The movement of the car was making him more than dizzy. "Rightfully so. You've probably got a concussion, and you needed 9 stitches. You should rest." Hearing this, Ignitus turned his head and opened his eyes as much as he dared. Everything was blurry and unfocused. "I don't remember going to the hospital." "We didn't." The silence sat heavily between them. "What happened to the counselor?" "It's handled, Ignitus. That's all I'm saying on the matter. Now rest." Again the car was silent. "Is Emma okay?" Now his papa audibly sighed, sounding both disappointed and frustrated. "Ignitus, son, spend some time worrying about yourself right now instead of everyone else," he said, now turning the car radio on to fill the silence. "Close your eyes. We'll be home soon." Ignitus did, feeling as his eyes blurred. Feeling as his eyes burned, and not caring about the tears that made their way down his cheeks. "I'm sorry." There was silence before Papa sighed once again, now stealing a glance at his grandson. "Not as much as I am, son," and flashback. "If I hadn't gone after him, then maybe Papa wouldn't have had to do what he did," Ignitus said softly, listening to Ember's trembling breaths. She could see how it had been eating him up inside. Ember wanted to be upset with him, but she couldn't, just like how she wanted to be upset with Finn. She'd been thinking about him as her brother spoke. He wasn't wrong. Finn did have good intentions, and the fact that Ignitus himself seemed to approve of him meant a great deal to her. I love you, but you always go overboard when it comes to me, Iggy," she said, looking up at him, her eyes still glassy. Immediately, Ignitus sat up, looking at her. "I love you too, and I didn't go overboard, Emma. After that day you were different. For months you were not the same. I could tell, even through the letters and the phone calls. What did he do to you?" Ignitus felt pure anxiety as she stared back at him. "Are you going to believe that I'm telling you the truth?" she asked softly. "Of course I would. Why would you ask me that?" Because Papa didn't. Nothing more than this happened. I swear on everything. Will you believe me when I say that? Yes. It was basically a forced makeout until I freaked out and shoved him off, Iggy. I never felt like a victim because it was something I thought I wanted. Yes, I felt dirty and used and gross, but more than that, I felt so stupid. I felt so dumb and embarrassed. I was so scared because I got taken for a ride that went wildly out of my control so quickly, she said, looking up at him. I think that was the moment I realized I never had control. I wasn't as mature or as smart as I thought I was. I was in absolutely no way ready for anything of a sexual nature with anyone. Not ready for what he wanted to do, and not even ready for what we had done. Ember shook her head now, looking away from Ignitus, feeling embarrassed. I know you'd done way more than that with girls by the time you were 15. For me though, Iggy, it felt like a monster was trying to devour every ounce of me just to get to my soul, and I needed that feeling to stop. Leaning closer, Ignitus cocked his eyebrow, looking his sister in the eye. So I was right, I didn't overreact, he said, watching as Ember scowled at him. Ignitus, however, shook his head with a sigh as he leaned back. Emma, I would burn this entire planet to nothing for you. You're my baby sister. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you, and I mean that, he said earnestly, watching the fresh tears fall down her cheeks. I know you do. You're the best big brother a girl could ask for, Ember said with a tired smile. They sat in silence for the longest time, Ember still squeezing his arm, feeling as he squeezed her back. The room now was bright with early morning light, and Ignitus could hear the sounds of Finn moving around the apartment. He thought Ember had finally fallen asleep, but her voice surprised him as she spoke. They never brought him home, Iggy. He's still at the prison. I want to bring Papa home. I'll call today and see if we can go get him, he said, feeling her nod. I have a meeting with Aberdeen this morning. I'll call on the way there. Don't worry about any of it, okay? I won't. How are you feeling about you and Finn? He asked, watching as Ember stretched. I'm thinking that you were right and that maybe I was overwhelmed and upset and was about to start jumping into a big decision without thinking it through, she said softly. Thank you for reminding me to think it through. And thank you for sticking up for Finn. You know, rather than Dad, he should have asked for your blessing, she said, the thought making her smile. How do you know he didn't? Ignitus asked with a grin, watching as Ember's head whipped around to face him. Huh? You heard me, he said with a smirk, watching her mouth drop open. Iggy, did he ask you? I'm not gonna ruin that surprise. Iggy, tell me. No, hey, don't pinch me. Emma, stop it. Now Ignitus scrambled off the bed, holding his sister at bay. Tell me! I'll take the secret to either your proposal or my grave, he said as Ember laughed. Sitting back on the edge of the bed, she tried stemming her giggles, Ignitus watching as she wiped her eyes, sniffling again. Emma, I'm okay, Iggy, I am. I'm just so sad. We lost him all over again and didn't even know it. This breaks my heart, but I can't change any of it. But I can hate our parents for putting us through this pain. And Iggy, I do. With another sniff, Ember wiped her eyes. I know you have stuff to do. I'll be right here, and I know Finn won't leave. Besides, we have to talk anyways. Ignitus nodded, watching as she stood from the bed. Oh, wait, that was. I know you have stuff to do. I'll be right here, and I know Finn won't leave. Besides, we have to talk anyways. Ignitus nodded, watching as she stood from the bed. They shared a look, and when Ember nodded, Ignitus opened the door. Together they walked down the hallway, Ember leading her brother to the door. As they entered the living room, Finn, who'd been sitting on the couch, jumped to his feet. However, before he could speak, Ember raised her hand, silencing him before he could start. I talked to Iggy. He told me enough to know that you weren't trying to hurt me. Finn, right now I'm hurting. My heart is beyond broken, and I just need some time, Ember said, her voice shaking. We are absolutely going to talk about this, but right now I'm just very, very sad, she said, wiping her eye, as Finn nodded in silent acceptance. Now she turned to her brother, hugging him. Drive safe, I love you, and I'll see you later, she said, giving him a tight squeeze, feeling as he returned the gesture. I love you too, Em. I'll give you a call when I hammer out the details, okay? He asked as his sister pulled back, nodding. She opened the door, and with a nod to Finn, Ignitus walked out of the apartment. It was only when he climbed into the truck did Ignitus pull the file from under his sweatshirt. It had been more than easy to lift it while Finn and Ember were distracted. Flipping through, he pulled out the death certificate. Dialing the prison, This was something he wanted to do for Ember before he left. It was the only closure he could give her. AAA State Penitentiary. This line is recorded. How can I help you? The clipped voice said, and taking a breath, Ignitus spoke. Hi, this might be weird, but I just found out that my grandfather died and was cremated in your facility a few years ago. His ID number is T-34796A. Is there any way we could come pick him up? Ignitus listened to the tapping of the keyboard on the other side, and again the person on the other line spoke. I apologize. According to the record, those remains exceeded the pickup holding period earlier this year. When this happens, the remains are respectfully distributed on the ground. I'm very sorry, Mr. Florence. The gambit of emotions Ignitus felt in this very short moment was immense. However, he settled on confusion. My family name isn't Florence, it's Flint. I'm looking for the remains of Fewer Flint. Hold on for just a moment, please. Again, Ignitus listened to the tapping of the keyboard on the other line. Okay, I see what happened. One of us must have mixed up the ID number. Fewer Flint is inmate T-34769A, not T-34796A. Okay, well, can I come to get him? Ignitus asked, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. Though the words from the other line made him stop dead. He's still serving his sentence, so no. However, in the next 2 years, he should be eligible for parole pending good behavior. Wait, what? This can't be right. He died. No way. This could not be freaking real. I apologize, but I believe you were misinformed. Fewer Flint is very much alive. Ignitus was floored, and at the same time he couldn't believe it. There was no way. Can he have visitors? Ignitus asked tentatively. He needed to see himself before he even considered telling Ember this news. After another series of tapping, he got his answer. Yes, he's eligible for visitation from those on his list. Can you tell me if my sister and I are on that list? Ignitus and Ember Flint. On the list are wife Blaze Flint, son Aiden Flint, grandchild Ignitus Flint, and grandchild Ember Flint, so yes, you should be able to visit. You do have to schedule in advance, but because it's early enough this morning, I can see if I can add you in if you'd like. Ignitus listened, answering the questions the woman asked, feeling a weird mixture of anxiety and fear and hope. Okay, you're all set. You can come in at 9 a.m. Please bring photo ID and Ignitus couldn't believe it. If this was real, fill out some forms and you'll be all set. Ember would freak out. To arrive 15 minutes early for screening, okay? Immediately, he snapped his attention back to the phone. Bring ID, arrive 15 minutes early for screening, and I'll have forms to fill out. Excellent. Is there anything else I can help you with? Asking for the address, Ignitus jotted it down, ending the call and punching it into the phone. He watched as the GPS mapped out a route. He glanced at the clock. It was close to 7 a.m., and if he left now, he'd get there on time. Sending a last look up towards Ember's apartment, Ignitus drove off. The room was quiet as he leisurely read the novel. It was one he'd read several dozens of times by now, and its sole purpose was to pass the time. Photos his late wife brought littered the wall of his bunk, photos of his grandchildren. The door to his cell unlocked, and looking away from the book, Fewer Flint placed it on his chest, watching as the door opened. Flint, you have a visitor, the officer said, watching as the man before him barked a laugh and picked his book back up. My son hasn't had the audacity to visit me since he told me my wife died. I'd rather not, he said, finding his place and continuing on. You sure? He doesn't look old enough to be your son. This now caught his attention. Closing the book, Fewer Flint stood, dropping it on the bed, holding out his arms so they could be shackled for transport. The walk to the visitor's room was short, and as they passed the windows, he looked through them, scanning the tables, spotting him immediately. Ignitus sat at the table, looking around, feeling as if his heart were about to beat its way out of his chest. He was crazy. He had to be. His fingers drummed against the table, and hearing the sound of the door opening yet again, he looked up. Ignitus stood, feeling his breath catch. There was no way this could be real. None. He felt the familiar pressure on his shoulders as he was pulled towards the older man and hugged tightly. Ignitus, son, it's so good to see you. You've grown up so much. Holy crap. Well, that took a frickin' turn. What the hell? Okay, I guess the grandfather is still alive. Oh my god. That's actually really awesome because he was only defending his family, and I mean, their grandmother isn't around. Their parents hate them, so it's nice that they have some family. Um, Hopefully this will bode good things. That was a really nice chapter. I really enjoyed that. That was, I mean, it was sad at first, but then it became happy, and the Lich wasn't mentioned once. Anyway, not that I have any problem with like the whole thing with the Lich, but it is nice to just have a a nice happy chapter, without him. And hopefully the book has a happy ending, cuz I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, obviously it has a happy ending. It has to have a happy ending, right? Okay, I'm gonna go off because I have to take my pills in a few minutes, and my alarm's gonna sound in like 4 minutes, so I gotta go now. And I'll be back in, I don't know, 10 minutes or something with another chapter. Okay, love you guys.